My name is Stefano Bertuzzi. I'm a Chief Executive Officer at ASM, and I am particularly happy to be joined on stage here by Dr. Donna Ginther. Donna Ginther is a top-flight labor economist in the country and in the world, I would say, is the Roy Roberts and Regents Distinguished Professor of Economics at the University of Kansas, and she's the director of the Institute for Policy and Social Research at the University of Kansas, and a member of the National Bureau of Economic Statistics. Dr. Ginther and her collaborator have worked in the past 6 months or so on a report looking at the workforce in microbiology. This is a report that we asked Donna to develop and her team because we thought it was very important for ASM to understand the physiognomy of the workforce. And we also had fun showing an economist, a labor economist, how much more fun biologists are. So we invited her to the meeting as well. And jokes apart, really delighted to have here with us Donna. And do you want to say something, introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Stefano. It's my pleasure to learn and study the microbiology workforce. I was happy to see how diverse and how strong the demand is for microbiologists in the U.S. economy. So you really are well positioned for the future in terms of growth of your field and your profession.
That's wonderful. This is very encouraging. And by the way, the report has been released this week, so you can find it on the ASM website. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask any staff about this. Donna, could you, in a few words, summarize what are the take-home messages that emerge from this study? You already pointed at one, that of diversity or so, and that we're well positioned. Why are we well positioned? What did you see there that surprised you, in a sense?
What I see in microbiology, the difference from other biomedical fields is that you have a robust employment across many different sectors of the economy. You have industry jobs, you have academic jobs, you have government jobs, and you had a pandemic that really underscored the demand for your services. So you see from 2018 to 2023, a huge increase in demand for all levels of microbiology training and increased salaries for microbiologists. The other thing I would say is that the fact that you have industry demand for microbiology means that going forward as enrollments drop in higher education, you're going to be insulated from that downturn in academia that other biomedical fields will feel the bite of.
That's very interesting and very encouraging. Is there anything that surprised you in analyzing the data?
I just think that there was a huge jump in microbiologists moving from academia into industry after 2003. And we attribute that to the NIH doubling. There were a whole bunch of students trained in the early 2000s, and the number of tenure-track jobs actually was flat or falling. So those scientists ended up in industry, and in industry jobs, they're going to be more likely to patent. So I'm curious to see if the influx of microbiologists into industry actually resulted in new technology and innovation.
This is interesting. Is there anything that you have found in this study that gave you particular trouble? Was there any difficulties that you encountered compared to other fields that you may have analyzed before?
Well, we had to work hard to identify microbiologists in federal statistical data. So there's a microbiologist occupation, and that's 20,000 people in the United States. But actually, there are 120,000 trained microbiologists, and they work across a number of different occupations. So we had to get creative in identifying the share of clinical technicians and science managers who actually have a microbiology degree. And we identified them and looked at their salaries and their career trajectories.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that based on the education, based on the degrees that people receive that you track, you have about 120,000 microbiologists, but then you don't find them directly in categories, pre-established categories of occupation, the work that they do.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. So they span a number of occupations. And so we had to actually get creative and look at job posting data and look at the occupations that required microbiology as a specific skill. And then we used that information to identify the occupations most likely to be populated by microbiologists. And so the clinical technician job title, occupation title, about 11% of microbiologists, of those clinical technicians, are microbiologists. So it's these occupation categories are much broader than microbiology.
Very interesting. So what comes to mind immediately as ASM here is, do we have some work to do as an association? Is there a way of influencing, and you're very familiar with all this, how the occupation are characterized? Do we have some activity here to do and better capture the profession of microbiology in those categories so that can be accounted more directly rather than by inference?
It's a really hard problem to sort
I
of.
was expecting
Yeah,
that answer.
yeah. So I mean, for doctorates, right? You know, a doctorate in microbiology is working in a microbiology field. But if you look at the bachelor's and master's degree, which are the majority of degrees awarded, then it's hard to infer. Occupations change every 10 years, so you have an opportunity to influence how those are coded.
Remember to send me an email at the right time to do that, because we don't want to miss out. It's very important. So you said there are about 110,000, 120,000 microbiologists in the country. Is that a lot or a little?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
But they're spread across many different sectors and many different occupations. So that breadth is actually a real strength of your profession.
Yeah, and that's the characteristic, the hallmark of microbiology, right? Microbes touch everything, and we are in so many different places that gives you economists trouble in figuring it out. You know, where the hell are you, right? I get it. Can you talk about the PhD versus bachelor's and master's? Did you see any differences in here or trends that are different than in other disciplines?
Sure, you saw a rapid growth in microbiology undergraduate degrees starting in 2011. So by 2021, the last year of data, we saw about 8,500 degrees awarded per year. Now, those are going to trend down because enrollments are trending down in the United States because of the echo of the baby bust. We do also see a sharp increase in the number of master's degrees, especially relative to biochemistry. Biochemistry produces more undergraduates, but fewer master's degrees. And I think the master's degree is an important pathway to industry, which is why you produce so many. And then I was going to mention doctorates. Doctorates peaked in 2014 and then have trended down. And I think that's kind of working off an excess supply of biomedical PhDs that resulted from the NIH doubling early in the century.
Do we have any evidence whether those bachelors or masters are going to find jobs with those degrees, or whether they continue on to doctorate work, or what fraction of that is?
We didn't look at the transition from undergraduate to doctorate, and that's something we could easily do. But we do see that 90% of microbiologists, highest degree in microbiology, are working in a job that is closely or somewhat related to their degree, and that exceeds other disciplines such as biochemistry and chemistry.
It seems to me that this is a really important point that you're making, that of all these bachelor, masters, and PhDs, that most of them, 95%, actually work in what they were trained for. And this would argue that I think that's the point that you were making at the beginning, that the demand is actually strong for microbiology, that people don't have to reinvent themselves.
The demand is incredibly strong, and you couple that with the fact that 1 in 10 microbiologists is over the age of 65 and will likely be retiring soon. So there's going to be increased demand going into the future to replace that 10% of the workforce that is at retirement age.
So let's assume for a second that you're not an economist anymore, or you keep all your knowledge of economy, but you have a job which is not related to what you are trained for, and you're a training officer at a large university that has a large undergraduate program, and you have a line of people that come to you and say, Donna, what should I major in, right? Would you recommend them to go into microbiology?
Most definitely, because you have a broad field that's applicable along a number of lines of science and along a number of industries. So because of that breadth, the demand for your students is going to be high moving forward. So microbiology is a growing and will continue to grow as an important biomedical field.
I hope that the audience realizes how important and how exciting this is, because from where I come with actually my own background as a basic scientist, this is typically not the situation that you have when you're in other fields where you say, if I have to be totally honest, I would not recommend you to get into this because there is disequilibrium on supply and demand. See, I can use economics terms, yeah? And so this would not be fair, to put you in a system where there's no output in the pipeline. So I think that that is a very strong hallmark of our field that we should be able to tap. I'm very pleased to hear that. And I think as ASM, we can really, in our activities, I see our education director in the back there, and it's an important message to send.
I agree. And this is in contrast to many other biomedical fields where the demand for biomedical training and the job opportunities are not as robust. So I think you stand out.
So if you now look, forget the data for a second, which I know it's hard for you. Forget the data for a second, but if you look at a McKinsey Global Institute report of 4 or 5 years ago, it estimates that about 65% of the inputs into the economy could actually be taken on by biological inputs. And what it was indicating was actually that it's a circular bioeconomy, right? The sustainability issue, and where microbes play such an important role. And you could transform those physical input, like oil. We're in Texas, right? And to instead fermentation and activities where you could take waste from agriculture, from urban waste, and have it fermented and transformed in high-value product that will be much more sustainable. So according to McKinsey, this could be up to 60% of powering the economy with all biology, not just microbiology. That's a big number, right? So do you think those, if you have to, again, imagine the future of the workforce, do you think this workforce will grow and the demand will grow?
I think so. And to your point, I'm actually a part of an NSF grant that is looking at environmentally beneficial catalysis, where they're trying to use microbes to transform recyclable plastic into polymers. So this is something that we're working on at the University of Kansas, and it will be the future of the economy as we move away from fossil fuels, trying to find the carbon sources and sources of polymers from renewable products.
I find this exhilarating and incredibly exciting as microbiologists to know that the workforce, the perspective from an economist who has actually been looked at so many fields telling us this, it's really an important message. So now let me ask you a question regarding you alluded it before very quickly in terms of the diversity of the workforce that is present in microbiology. Can you comment on that, of what you saw compared to other fields and the future?
Yes, I think a lot about diversity from the perspective of being an economist, where only 30% of our graduates are female. And in microbiology, you have 55% of doctorates being awarded to women and over 60% of undergraduate and master's degrees being awarded to women. So that was a wonderful revelation to see in the data. Also, about 20% of both your master's and undergraduate degree holders are from historically underrepresented groups, Black, African American, Hispanic, or Native American, which is a very high rate relative to other fields of science.
This other piece of wonderful news, and our objective as ASM is really of making microbiology one of the most diverse and welcoming fields. And so we set ourselves, looks like a high bar now, because we're already in a good position, but we definitely want to do better and better. for many reasons. And also, I know you're a demographer. Looking at the demographics of the workforce of the future. It becomes more and more important to ensure, not just from an equity issue, but also from a resource issue of how we make it appealing, to the generation of the future.
Agreed. And role model effects are real. So having a woman in the classroom or a person of color in the classroom tells young people that they can have a successful career in microbiology.
So let's look at salaries. In your report, you also look at salaries. So how do microbiology fare in terms of compensation?
Well, salaries are increasing. We looked at the Lightcast data on job postings, and we see that the salaries for clinical microbiologists grew about 11%, and the salaries for microbiologists engaged in managerial activities grew about 26%. Your ASM survey data show that PhDs in microbiology earn in the six figures. Scientists earn about $105,000, whereas lab managers earn close to 160. So these are really high-paying, good jobs.
That's also good to know. We heard in the presentation that you gave earlier today some concerns from the clinical microbiologists in particular regarding the bench technicians and their salaries and the retention issue that they have. These are tough jobs. You have to work shifts. The clinical lab works 24/7, and they have a retention issue. And this is a tough nut to crack. Do you have any comments or anything in that respect regarding what ASM could do based on the data that you have analyzed and you heard?
Well, it is a tough job, and the structure of those jobs are they're working for large employers who view them as production people. So one of the things that came out in the data was that there is a real concern about opportunities for job advancement, and I think that really is resonant for laboratory technicians. So ways to provide professionalization of the clinical track, opportunities for advancement and professional development, I think, are key to helping clinical laboratory technicians grow and innovate in their employment.
This is important, creating paths. That's something we need to think and work through on how that could be achieved. Another thing that we keep hearing after the release of this study is something that is very important, and it's been a trend in microbiology for a while. I call it all the microbiologists that don't know that they are microbiologists, and these are the discipline is becoming more and more broad. We thought that microbes were about microbes. Now, turns out that with metagenomics, we understood that the microbes in your gut actually affect your brain, and incredible discoveries like depression, can be linked to your flora in the gut, so which gives gut feeling a whole new meaning. And but it's very important because you have people who may not have a microbiology degrees. They may not even consider themselves a microbiologist, but they are doing microbiology. And I think there's more and more. Neuroscience, cancer, and many other areas are there. So people keep asking, is how can we account for those who are not trained in microbiology but are actually doing microbiology? Is there any trick that economists can use for that?
That's a hard one, right? Because we are using federal data that is tied to your degree. And so we were tracking degrees and employment and the relationship of employment to your degree. So there are many, and this came up in my several conversations with people here at the conference, people who don't have a microbiology degree but are working in microbiology. And so one way to do it for these, the research active scientists is to look at publications and look at what their degree is. And then if they're publishing in microbiology journals, then I would call them a microbiologist. Another way would be to survey your membership and see what share of your members consider themselves microbiologists but don't have that microbiology credential.
Yeah, that's the first aspect is is interesting. The second, I think it may be harder because I would suspect that those neuroscientists who are doing microbiology without knowing it may not be ASM member. So we are, in a sense, also victims of this new trends. And so it's something that maybe in the future we need to put our thoughts together on how to have it at least in.
Well, I think that you could have conversations with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, right? They are charged with tracking the scientific workforce, and so they might be able to use their survey instruments to actually collect that information.
Actually, this is a very interesting point, something I would have never thought of, right? Maybe we need to engage the country statistical agencies on this topic and have conversation with them. May ask you for some email addresses and go pester them. It would be interesting to have that conversation. I don't know where to start, but I think it is really important. I want to make sure if there are any questions in the audience for Donna, please raise your hand. Would be delighted to hear your thoughts or anything that can be happen.
Hi, you spoke briefly about salaries. I'm just wondering if you have data that talks about how salary differs for race, gender, sex, age, and also how it differs between academia and industry.
We did not look specifically at that, but we can. So that would be something for future study. We do have in our report, we do show the age earnings profile for both bachelor's and master's degree holders and doctorates. So earnings increase until prime age, and then as you get older, they kind of flatten out. So it looks like a healthy age earning profile. I'm actually at my university working on our own faculty salaries. So I know a lot about faculty salaries. Academia tends to pay less than industry, and there's also postdocs are not paid sufficiently. So that's an issue as well.
And that is not a hot topic button in the country right now, right?
Not at all.
Do you want to actually, this is important. Would you like to share your thoughts about what is happening, about unions for graduate students and postdocs and what I understand from your study that ASM or microbiology is not so much affected by this disequilibria in supply and demand. But is there any message that you'd like to send the young scientists that are in microbiology in that respect?
Well, I have a paper that was published in Nature Biotechnology in 2017 with Shulamit Khan that shows that if you take a postdoc, it doesn't, and you end up working in industry, there is no economic return to that postdoc. The only thing a postdoc is good for is for an academic job. The share of academic jobs are going to be flat at best or declining. And postdocs themselves, graduate students and postdocs, are recognizing that their chances of getting those few and far between academic positions are getting harder and harder, and they're not willing to continue to make $55,000 a year with a PhD. That's what undergrads in economics make, right, after they graduate. So they are voting with their feet, and the scientific funders need to recognize that you can't repeal market forces. We're in a labor shortage right now. The demand for workers, is, especially highly trained workers, is very high. And we would have to ask, our friends in industry, do you need a postdoc to get an industry job? I haven't gotten an answer to that, but that would be something that I would encourage young graduate students or postdocs to ask about. If I'm going to end up spending my career in industry, do I need to spend 2, 4, 6 years in a postdoc?
This is actually a very, very important point. And I guess there's no yes or no answer, but I think it's something very, very important in the training program also to communicate that these are questions that trainees need to ask themselves and ask their mentors.
Exactly. And you need to ask it before you go to graduate school.
Exactly.
Not when you're about to defend your dissertation.
Thanks for all your work on this. So I have a question, and is maybe as a labor economist, the classification of graduate students and what that means for unionization efforts Are they employees? Are they students? And then what that means for the stipends that they get.
Well, graduate students are classified as both students and employees at the university. Actually, graduate students have it better than postdocs. Many universities do not know how many postdocs they have because postdocs are hired by individual labs, and those people may or may not appear as employees at a university. So I think that in some ways, graduate students have a well-defined role at a university. They're both students and they're supported on research projects. Postdocs, less so. And you know, the large funding agencies set the stipends, and for many, for about 20 years, we didn't have inflation, so those stipends didn't really go up in real terms. But COVID happened, and with COVID, actually, after the flu pandemic in the 1900s, there was a huge spike of inflation.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah. So after COVID, there's a huge spike of inflation, and what was unique about COVID, we had this sharp downturn, and then all of the baby boomers retired all at the same time. So that all the baby boomers left the building at once. There were these huge job openings, and we wound up with a labor shortage that we didn't have in 2020, but we have it in 2022. So demand is increasing, salaries are increasing, and the stipends for graduate students and postdocs were not keeping pace.
Wonderful. I learned that inflation is a sequela of pandemic. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Hi. You've talked about the breadth of opportunity in the field and how there's a high demand for microbiologists. As I prepare to enter the workforce in about a year, I'm geographically targeting my search. So do you think that opportunity is equally distributed across the country, or are there hotspots and then areas where there's not much opportunity? If you could kind of expand on that.
There's high demand in the most populous states. So Texas, California, New York, the East Coast. You see a higher concentration of microbiologists, but that aligns with the population. As a person living in the middle of the country, I would encourage you to not limit your search geographically if you don't have to. There are lots of places that have great opportunities. So especially if you're an academic, those jobs are few and far between. So taking half the opportunities off your list could prove problematic.
Yeah, we see a lot of shortage in the field of clinical microbiology, clinical microbiology technologists. Do you have any data, like how many new trained the clinical microbiologists, supply and demand in this field?
We saw a huge increase in the demand for clinical microbiologists starting in 2020. You see a huge increase. We are producing a lot more microbiology undergrad and master's degrees, and some of those people retired. So, one of the things that, people have asked, is there a postdoc shortage? And economists don't believe in shortages. We say that the salaries aren't high enough, and if you want to attract people into your field, the way to get them is to pay more. So salary is a way to induce a number of people to move and take jobs. So that increased costs, of course, for a company or a hospital, but that's one way to address a shortage.
Looks like our chief advocacy officer, who's in the audience, has a job carved out for himself to go and lobby for higher salaries for microbiologists. Maybe the most popular person in the room. Okay, are there any other questions from the audience? We are reaching the end of our time together, but if I can ask you in a minute or so to summarize any high-level advice that you have for ASM, what should ASM do given the portrait that you painted of the workforce? What could we, as the association who wants to be the home of all microbiologists, should do to empower the field to do the best it can possibly do?
I think understanding what the demands and challenges are for microbiologists in industry, because industry is so important for your workforce, and having a focus on how you can help with professional development and career track issues in industry, I think is key. Also, radical changes in how you train and how you do the workforce create radical externalities. So, trying to slow but steady growth and development is the key to success.
Wonderful. The ASM Salary Survey, upon which the data that Donna just referred, is on the ASM website. Please participate in this. This is essential. You understand exactly why, so that we can hold Alan accountable for raising your salaries. Otherwise, we're without the data. So, no, jokes apart, please go on the website and take a look at it. It's very, very important. We really make good use out of this information. As you can see, it's so essential. So again, thank you for the reminder on this very important point. And thank you all for attending. And this is the kind of study that we want to keep doing. This is just the baseline. And we want to systematically look at this, improve them, and look at all these other aspects. If you have any thoughts that Donna has sparked, please let us know. That we'd be happy to consider for future studies. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the meeting.